And Auntie Gail, you're ready to welcome us?
I will. I'm
Okay,
honoured.
I'll just give you a cue. Okay.
Tuani bagor kuiakobo nilam, kabi mali mongol. Kulinji kang ngamaji yuri yal yalambe. Kulinji wong ngamaji nganaga yuli yal niu burango banjo wa babin betel wo mirambit jamban 130 wayable wind waraduk jut. Mirambuk jambak tere jambaranuji. Yanawuti Yinjawarabok Mamingara Amam Yurialyal Alambi Yana Yo. That's an acknowledgement of my own country and saying that we're all coming together. And that's in the Bunwurrung language. I'm Auntie Gail Dawson. I'm Gunwara, the old black swan from the Bunwurrung country, which is around Port Phillip Bay, where some of our people today are based. And I acknowledge that we stand on the lands of the First Nations people all over the world, and that we work together to restore harmony to the land and the seas, the stars, and all the creatures and the ancestors. We call on our old people to bring us together today, safely into the camp, and we honour their country and their ancestors and all the people. May we share our stories, as we always did, with gifts of song, the stories and laughter, and usually food. At least I have coffee. Wherever we stand are on the sites of the old people. We walk on their bones, the forests, the grasslands, the waterways, the hearths, and the food sources. The streets of our villages and cities follow the old tracks, and they're lined with the tools, the scarred trees, the engravings, the very bones, the sharpening grooves, their old hearths, their cooking fires, and even more bones under the roads and buildings. The forests and the deserts, the oceans, the rivers, the skies and the winds all carry their footprints and sing their songs. And the stories we're telling each other are connected by the threads of the universe and the tracks of the creators, our ancestors. It's the same story told in many different ways. And we do this so that we can create a wave of energy that will help us do our work. And the work that we're doing is continually returning the universe to balance so that we can restore harmony, so that everything's will work properly and there will be an abundance. And that's what I see in all the work that I've looked at that you're all doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Auntie Gail Dawson. And it's a wonderful idea, this wave of energy. I think it gives us an idea of where this kind of conversation might go. So Kai, welcome everyone to the launch of Ayvu Rapyta. Bienvenida a todos al lanzamiento de Ayvu Rapyta. I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Nerm, Melbourne, in particular Buleki Beck, Brunswick, whose traditional owners are the Wurundjeri of the Kulin Nation. Pay my respects to their elders and any other elders present here. And I'm very pleased to see that Santi Martinez is now joining us. Garland welcomes stories that are kept alive in the objects we make by hand. These stories connect us not only to each other, but also to generations before and ahead of us, as well as the land that is always there. We share a common struggle to keep these stories alive in a sea of information. Two stories intersect here. One is of Australian socialists who sought to create a utopia in Paraguay at the beginning of the 20th century. The other is a sacred myth that one of their descendants, Leon Cadogan, compiled in the indigenous language of Guarani and translated into Spanish. Despite its importance as a creation story, Ayvu Rapyta has never been translated into English, the native tongue of most Australians. Enter Andrea Ferrari, an Argentinian poet and friend of the MBR Guarani community of Yassi Porá. Andrea combines her literary career with work as a naturalist, and she's tirelessly translated this story along with Cadogan's copious notes. We're especially grateful to the MBR community, who is one of the many that sustain this heritage. They have allowed us to share their journey and exchange important knowledge. And let's hope that Santi Martinez, who represents the community, can eventually join us. Ayvu Rapyta is part of a vast living text, still alive and recited in MBR villages, and part of a secret tradition of prayer and practice. It is in the understanding that we will only have a glimpse of its meaning that we will invite you to read the text provided. Tonight and this morning, we will hear from Andrea and hopefully Santi about the Ayvu Rapyta and Yassi Porá. And then in the spirit of exchange, we'll hear from Tungurong artist Cassie Leatham about a work made to honor the sacred creature who created our land, Bunjil. Andrea, would you like to tell us about Ayvu Rapyta?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that I'm honored to be here and I'm very grateful for your attention. This has been a long process, and I'm also very grateful with Kevin for his patience and support. And especially with the Mwa Guarani friends I've been so lucky to make, because they are a precious culture, precious in their spirituality, which they seldom reveal because their way of protecting themselves has always been evading us. Therefore, the importance of the Ayvu Rapyta, because it's a secret text or a living text, let's say, which is usually parts of it sung, chanted, and danced in villages with a shaman. And so Cadogan was he must have been very special to have been able to receive this transmission of knowledge. And I feel privileged in the work of trying to translate this into English, which is a language that I love. I've also been helped by many people. For example, Roberto Benigno Benitez, a friend who knows Guarani. So we worked all the time with the original, not the Spanish translation, which I think helps to make it a purer translation into English. Yes, there's a balance between both. The Burapata is a wonderful book, text, sorry. It is, the first part is strongly mystical. It's got the creation story of the Mwa Guarani. And then after chapter 8, you've got a series of legends and stories, which are all delightful. And they are worth reading, of course, as well. But the first part, I sincerely believe it's at a very high spiritual level. That's what prompted me to make this known in some way. If you knew how little attention and how relegated the Guarani are in my country, you wouldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that these people with this spiritual treasury were ignored and have no water in villages or in schools. People are blind to them. Tourists go to the Iguazu Falls and see the Iguazu Falls, and perhaps they see a group of Guarani singing their songs, and that's it. And there's a treasure there. That's what I sincerely would like to share. Um,
Can I just say that I've
so,
I've just
yeah,
sent a link to the selection that you've translated for the people in this meeting, and so it might be good if you could. I'm sure most people don't know what the Rapyta is. If you could explain what it
Agurapata
is.
is Leon Cadogan's, the Australian man, and a self-made anthropologist, is the text that he translated from several different Boa Guarani people around 1950. It depicts the different prayers of the Boa Guarani, prayers for birth, prayers for death or dirges, all kinds of legends and stories. And at the beginning, especially the first two chapters, they are strongly mystical in their view of the creation of the world. I can find no other word for that. Beautiful, really beautiful. The problem is, or the good thing is that the Guarani give an utmost importance to words. Words have souls. Words are souls. When you come to the world, your name is absolutely connected to your soul and your health. And so the words in the Abu Rapata are uh, not any words for a Guarani, not words like you find them in newspapers. They are sacred, absolutely sacred. And that's the tradition that they have come to share. I think Santi's here.
Yes, he seems to be here, but
Santi is a friend.
doesn't seem to have.
The microphone on.
So we can
There.
wave to him.
Abullevete, Santi.
So he doesn't seem to be able to have a microphone at the moment, but at least I'm assuming he can hear. Bienvenido, Santi Martinez.
¿Escucha, Santi? ¿Escuchas? ¿Sí? ¿Se escucha? Perhaps you can unmute him, Kevin.
He doesn't have a microphone on at the moment.
Oh.
Can you perhaps explain, Andrea, that the situation of the Yasipora community?
All right.
And what this project hopes to deliver for them?
Jasipora is a beautiful small village in the outskirts of Iguazu town, near the Iguazu Falls. It's got around 300 inhabitants, 65 families, a severe lack of water, in spite of being in a land of rivers and brooks and falls, due to socio-political conditions, let's say. And when I started with this, I always made clear to Kevin that I didn't want anything in return, but to show the work so that some good could come to my friends at Jasepora. For example, Santiago has got a wonderful project. It's the first of its kind in my country. It's sincerely amazing. It started last year with all the difficulties of last year, and it consists in an association for the first time only made of Guaraníes, no whites. And it's called Mbua en Turismo. This means that they will guide the tourists around their own lands, which they have never done, amazingly. Santi is a very good guide. Santi es un guía con mucha experiencia y con una visión muy profunda, with a very deep vision of what he talks about the land. He doesn't call them tourists, he calls them travelers. And he's starting to educate, but only among Boa, yes, no whites involved. He's starting to teach how to guide white tourists only by Boa Guarani people. And this, among many other things that people do at Jasipora, um, ask me, and I can tell you.
Well, I just thought, Andrea, it might be good, although we were hoping that Santi would be able to share a recitation with us in the language. If you could maybe just recite a little bit of this so that we can get a flavor for it. I thought
I am
the piece, particularly about the hummingbird, because the hummingbird plays such an important role in
a
this.
hummingbird, yes, plays a
And
very important role in Boa culture and in Boa religion.
all right,
Uh,
so shall I share the screen with the text in
yes,
it?
Santi is telling me that he has Wi-Fi problems, which is not surprising, but he's here.
Good.
Santi, estoy explicando que tenés problemas de señal. No te preocupes. Kevin está mostrando la primera parte de Ayvu Rapyta y la voy a leer un pedacito en inglés. I'm
Thanks
telling,
everyone for your patience,
yes,
given
I'm telling Santi
the
what's going
large
on.
breadth and distance. We have to accept that there can be issues like this.
Yes.
But Andrea, would you like to perhaps set the scene for chapter 1, and which I've got on the screen at the moment? And
If you can all read, then perhaps there is no need for
I
me
think
to
it's always good to have a voice.
Okay. Our Father, the first, the ultimate first, formed his own body from primordial darkness. As he surged, he gave form to the small rounded stool, the divine soul of his feet, in the midst of primordial darkness. The reflection of divine wisdom, the divine hear-it-all perception, the divine palm of his hands holding the sacred staff, the divine palm of his hands in flourishing bows, Nyamandu formed as he searched in the mists of primordial darkness. In the divine sublime crown of his head, the flowers in the headdress were dewdrops. Among the flowers of the divine headdress, Mainoi, the primeval bird, flew around, fluttering. While our first father grew and made his own divine birth, he existed in the midst of primordial winds, even before conceiving his future earthly abode, before conceiving his future firmament, his future earth. Mainoi, the hummingbird, refreshed his mouth. The one who sustained Yamandu with sacred nourishment was the hummingbird. Before creating his future abode, as he came into being, sorry, Kevin, our father Nyamandu the first saw no darkness, even if there was no sun. He existed in the light of his own heart. His divine wisdom served as the sun.
Okay, thank you so much, Andrea. And so this is a very curious thing. There's this bird that feeds the god figure in Ayvu Rapyta. So the hummingbird, it does seem, has a very strong role in the cosmology.
In many cultures in South America, as Maria Fernanda probably also knows. No?
Yes. And there is also a story of a flood as well.
The first earth is created by Nyamandu. He surges from this darkness, almost we could say like a tree. And as he creates the world, the first thing he creates are words, then love, then songs, and then the other gods that will accompany him with their female counterparts. But in this first earth, where there's already a variety of animals and creatures which are wonderful, Wawarani have the most exact taxonomy of their own about the rainforest creatures. Imagine 22 different, more, almost 30 names for wasps and bees. And so this beautiful first earth gets destroyed by a flood. It is hard to say if this has an origin in a certain Christian influence due to the Jesuit missions. It hasn't been proved either true or not. But in any case, this flood has to do with the sin of incest. But even if there is a flood, there's no concept of sin, sorry. The transgressors are saved by praying and chanting. And so a new earth is later created. But those who had not done things right in the first earth, in the second earth are animals or plants or trees. All of them have souls. In this new earth, one of the gods is asked to provide, and he does. And so the Moa exist in this second earth, in which all the creatures are images of the original ones, which are in the abode of the gods, not on earth. But yet you can connect with them, through different
Yeah, it's
operations.
a glimpse anyway of the story. Now, in the spirit of this event, which is the beginning potentially of a dialogue with the Imbiak community and their journey to ensure that they can stay on the land where this story takes place. I thought it might be quite nice if we could hear from Cassie Leatham. Would you be able to share a story with us which has a parallel to the Ayvu Rapyta in terms of the way a bird features?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, good, good. So anyway, I'm very pleased to welcome Tangarong woman of the Kulin Nation, Cassie Leatham, who's also going to be sharing a beautiful story with us in the next issue of Garland and has very kindly offered to share it with us this morning. Thank you, Cassie.
Thank you so much. So Wawa, hello, Neranik, Cassie. My name is Cassie. I'm the Dungarang Waiwarang Virgin of the Kulin Nation. So I'm Tangarong, a Wurundjeri woman of the Kulin Nation. I'm here to share a little story that I grew up with, and it has a lot of different variations amongst our Kulin peoples. So this is my story told to me when I was young by my Auntie Judy Monk, a Dudungarang woman, and my Auntie Lee Healy, also a Dudungarang woman. So many, many years ago, a meteorite came to Earth, and as it hit the Earth, out came Bunjil, a wedge-tailed eagle or eagle hawk. So he came out, and as he looked around, there was nothing at all. So he actually created our mountains, our rivers, our valleys. And when he looked around, he made our flora and our fauna. As he flew high above the sky, he actually seeked a little bit of wind from Balian. Balian was his brother, the bat. He's actually my family totem. Balian was down by the beautiful Golden River, Waring, and he was actually splashing around in the water. As Balian was splashing around in the water, it became really muddy and lurky. And Bunjil above, as he flew over, his feathers went down, flew down, whirling in the winds, and it landed in the mud. He asked Wan, the crow, to open up his mouth to let more wind out, so he could actually send another one of his feathers to whirl down into the other side of the mud, the murky waters. So as he did this, one gave the winds for Bunjil's feather to fly down into the murky waters that Balayan was actually splashing in. Balayan actually divided the waters with a branch from a sacred tree. Anyway, with one of the trees there, as the story goes, with one of the trees was a stringy bark tree, and a piece of that stringy bark tree fell into the murky waters on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, there was nothing but mud. With those two beautiful feathers that landed, okay, in the mud, out came Bajur, woman. Woman was created from mud. And from the stringy bark, man was made. So then they walked together and created people. So Bunjil, our wedge-tailed eagle, there's also another different version as well, that when you do see Bunjil flying around above you and he gives you the gifts of his flight feathers, it means that you are sacred knowledge holder. When I was young, I was actually making fire with my grandfather, and he was telling me recreation stories and how the story about Bunjil making our valleys and how important it is to nurture our country, our beak, and to be brought up on country and nurturing country and looking after not only our peoples, but our wildlife and our trees and our environment. I grew up in a sustainable living environment that gave me that insight into how my ancestors, my lyric will carry forward. So in keeping true to myself, I took myself back into days and ways of how my ancestors lived and to reconnect with the stories. I made it a thing in my life to go out and to document the eagles and the trees and what trees do they nest in. And all up, I found 3 beautiful nests, and one's actually on my property. And these are the flight feathers of Bunjil. I've been gifted these when I actually had the privilege to see the beautiful juvenile chick, grow into form, and it was released the day that I went under the nest to actually, just check to see whether it was there or not. I actually had the privilege of its first flight. In its first flight, I was amazed because down came these 2 beautiful Bunjil flight feathers. Now, I'm very passionate about this, as you can tell. They came down, they whirled straight down and landed left and then right. And straight away, I could retell that story in my head about man and woman. Now, this was this year. Last year, I actually took my grandson up to country, just where we're from, at Boysdale. We went up over the ledge of this mountain, and there's this huge big tree, and it's got scars in it and everything. And here's this big, huge Bunjil's nest there. And my little grandson, he's 6 years old, and he wants to be nurtured. He loves our culture. He's passionate, just as I am. And he said to me, Cass, can we sing that beautiful Bunjil song? So we started singing Bunjil Malika Lua, and we started dancing. And as we started singing and dancing, down came more flight feathers from Bunjil. They came down again and they landed straight into the muddy soils that we were dancing on. He said, what does this mean? I said, we are the carrier of this knowledge. We are the carrier of these stories. We have to pass this knowledge on. And you, my child, you are the next generation, and you have to be taught everything there is to know about Bunjil, the wedge-tailed eagle, our creator. So as I started telling him the stories, we found some mud. We put it in our pocket. We went down to the river where the tree is set. We went down to the river and we collected pipe clay. There's an emu called PP. You can actually see him on ABC. Okay, he's the oldest living emu, and he lives in our property. There's when the feathers molt from the emu, the tips actually have the fat. So we collected some of the molting feathers and we extracted some of the fat from the feather tips, and we put it into a little jar. We went home, we had sacred ochre from Dudungaran country, and we mixed it all up. With that pipe clay, I actually started singing the songs, making this beautiful clay pot. The stringy bark that was collected by Flynn, I actually molded into and softened with the emu fat, and I molded that into the clay pot. I crushed the ochre and I mixed all the ochre in it, and those beautiful flight feathers that came down with these ones as well, I embedded into the beautiful pot itself. So as I put the beautiful feathers into the pot, I stood back and I went, this is something very, very special. It's like a pot of knowledge. It's a pot of a vessel carrying the story of Bunjil, the wedge-tailed eagle, creating our ancestors, creating man from stringy bark and women from mud. So lo and behold, I actually showed a friend and I said, oh, look at this, what I've created. And she said, I have to capture this. This is amazing. So she took some beautiful photography for me. And then we entered it in the NASIA Darwin Telstra Art Awards, which actually I got selected. So this is actually exhibited at the Magnet, so the Darwin Museum of Art gallery. So this is my Bunjils, my lyric Bunjil creation ancestor pot. And some people look at it and think, oh, okay, but you have to understand the story. You have to be connected with the story. But when you see this in its prime, in its like physically see it, you actually can get goosebumps, because I had a little rock that was given to me by a scientist many, many years ago. And he said, when the time comes, you are going to crush this little piece of rock. You're going to embed it something very, very significant to tell a story. That rock was actually a part of a meteorite. I crushed it down and it is actually embedded in that pot too, to represent Bunjil coming down on a meteorite, coming up, creating everything on the Kulin Nation. And then those beautiful flight feathers that made man and woman. And that's my story that I'd love to tell. And I'm very, very passionate about. And I share with everyone with the utmost respect and gratitude from my ancestors.
Beautiful story.
Thank you. Sorry, I get very, very passionate because I love my culture so much. And for me telling, strangers, it's so empowering, because Bunjil isn't just an eagle hawk, or he's something so significant. And believe it or not, I've got so many beautiful images of him flying around. When I left for Melbourne 2 weeks ago to go back to uni, he actually flew beside my car and led me out of my home. When I came back, he was there to greet me. When I got back into my property, he flew above our car twice, and the juvenile was in tow. I went out on my bike riding. I hopped on my bike. We're in lockdown. We can only do 5K radius. I hopped on my bike, and as I rode around, what happened? Feathers fell down, and I looked above and I went, oh my, I stopped and I had goosebumps all over me, and I went, he's with me again. He's always, his spirit is with me, and it just guides me. It guides me to where my ancestors need me to be. And that's storytelling, song and dance, sharing my culture. No one can stop me. I'm unstoppable at this moment, because I want to share my culture. I want to share our stories. I want to be able to walk with everyone. And I'm deeply, deeply passionate about what I do. And as I said, at the moment, I'm a force to be reckoned with, because I just want everything to be out there. So thank you so much for listening to a part of my journey. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Cassie, for that.
Nguja means thank you in our language of the Kulin peoples.
That's wonderful. And Andrea, would you be able to convey some of this story to your friends in the MBR community?
Of course, I will.
Obviously,
they give a lot of importance to birds. I was listening to you, Cassie, and I was like thinking of all the ways in which Every bird is observed because it brings news, a message, a meaning. Some birds speak of other animals around, like jaguars. Every Mwa is very, very much aware, and I'm learning that as well. Which birds visit you are extremely important. We could connect this to ornithomancy, a very old ancient Greek and Roman art also. But it is part of everyday life in Wa people, the same as sharing their dreams every morning.
And on a practical note, Andrea just recently shared the good news to me, which is that firstly, a corrupt local governor who had been the source of great concern and
For
harm
20
in the
years.
community has been dismissed, which
Fine.
offers politically a new way forward for them. And also, someone has come forward with funds to build the well that they need
Yeah.
to be able to stay in their village,
Yes,
which
the
is
well that
where
can be
their
devoted.
stories are. So that is a great way forward for them and
Yes,
makes this an
hope.
opportunity to celebrate.
Yes, it is. I also feel that perhaps perhaps there's a new thing coming for them in a good way. They feel it that way. Santi has said so, that things are opening up, and his own Wine Turismo Association, the desire to be the owners of a land and to tell their stories like you do, Cassie, with that passion to
Yeah.
strangers in the same way you enjoy it. They also want to do that, but they are not heard usually. This is why I think that perhaps new times are coming for them, and perhaps we can help them in
Yeah.
many different ways. Sharing
Yeah.
their creational stories, sharing what they got to say, like you do, about the birds in their culture and what it's the same process you're describing. There are things that are like that in the Ayvu Rapyta as well,
Hmm.
like with a hummingbird or with owls.
Let's open
Yeah.
this up to conversation. I'm sure some of you will have some points that you'd like to make or something to share. It certainly reflects, Auntie Gail, your hope that there would be a wave of energy uh, which is created when you start to share these kinds of stories. And you have many stories as well that you're putting together in a book. Is that right?
No, eventually, yes,
Mm.
that would be great. I'm actually studying at the moment, so that limits me. But part of what I'm really interested in at the moment is the way that the stories that are being told today all put together how humans are not special. And I think that part of this was written in the text. Permission is asked upon crossing a stream, going into the rainforest, cutting a tree, in a world in which humans are not superior, but coexist with all kinds of creatures, both in the concrete and spiritual sense. And this is the thing that I'm interested in that Cassie's alluded to. And is it Andrea or Andre?
Andrea.
Andrea.
Yes,
I think they were your words, actually, that I just
yes,
read. And
yes,
this is what interests me at the moment, that humans have become convinced that they are like the boss of the world.
yes.
And part of, I think, what people like us are trying to do is to remind people that we coexist and that there are worlds out there that we don't even see most of the time. But some people do. And Cassie is talking about this. She actually sees each day the connection between herself and another world.
Mm.
And I think that's what all these stories have in common. And I've become convinced that it's the lesson that people need to learn at the moment, which is why I will become involved in gatherings like this, where we are saying, let's take our message out and remind people that They're not superior beings. They're just coexisting. And the stories of creation actually make that very, very clear, that everything came out of nothing, but nobody's meant to be boss of anything.
Yes, well, the reading Ayvu Rapyta made me look again at the Genesis story, the Western Christian creation myth, and see that it's a quite human-centric story, obviously, but clearly there are a lot of animals there, and there is potential for those animals to have their own particular agency and being, maybe that it's been lost. Clearly the dove is an important bird in the Christian mythology, and maybe there are ways also of seeing something like Christianity through the lens of stories like yours, Cassie, and Ayvu Rapyta, so that there is that greater sense of equality between the species.
Yeah, I agree.
Cassie?
Yeah,
I
definitely.
agree.
Sorry to interrupt. It's like I just have to just add another quick little story. And this is a bit of a personal journey one, just with COVID. I actually went for a bike ride, and I actually had a Eastern Rosella that came down and landed on my handlebars. And I ushered it off, but it didn't want to go. So it actually it actually sat on my handlebars for 20 kilometers on my bike. And I've never ever had a pet, never ever had a pet. And I just looked at this beautiful native bird, and it just had this connection, and something was calling to me. I've had the bunjil and wah, and then I had this Eastern Rosella, and I put it into the tree and it flew away. The next day, I went to the coffee shop, my favorite little coffee shop. She gave me a coffee in a mug with native birds, and I drank it. And I went to Sale, our local shops, to get some material for our mask making. And here was this material in budgie, birds. It was birds again. When I went back to my car, I looked up and I noticed that I was parked in front of a pet shop. And my very dear friend, who just got out of hospital after receiving treatment for cancer, walked into the pet shop to buy something. I followed her in. Here was this dear little tweeting blue budgie sitting in its little lonesome little cage. And I went up to it, and it basically rubbed its head on my finger. And the pet shop owner said, "Let's see what happens." And she opened the door, and it came right up to me. And she said, "Let me try." And she put her hand to it, and it backed off. I put my finger up, and it came up. I actually brought that budgie home, and it's been my godsend ever since. And today it talks in language. It says, "Woman jeka babapo kuya nernik." Oh, and it talks in language. It says "Jila," meaning play, "Jila," meaning play, "Narigi," he wants to dance. He's picking up all these forms, and I'm thinking, what does this mean? What's this connection? And it's just showing me this another insight how something so little and tiny can bring so much joy and happiness and love and connection. And another thing is, I'm publishing a book about Beaky being a native budgie, but he's blue, he's mutated. And it's about identity. Here's this little blue budgie. If he flew in a flock with the green and gold, he'd be basically attacked. Here I am, a fair-skinned Aboriginal. Why? Because of colonisation and genocide. Okay, we the genetics and everything have changed, just like Beaky. So I'm actually publishing a book about this dear little blue budgie who just feels like he's out of the flock, and he finds his way to a fair-skinned Aboriginal person that connects and wants to walk with her and tell a story about, we don't care what we look like. Our skin doesn't make us, this is not it's about what's in here and giving love. So that's just another little story, an upcoming one. So just be really mindful, because these creatures, and as Arnie Gale said, these creatures were all here, and we're just a part of it. We're just a part of it. So be kind to our beautiful little creatures.
Jules, don't
Yeah.
leave us. This is something similar to the story about the eel that you were yarning about,
Yes,
which
yes.
is your totem.
Yes, and it reminds me of my daughter who had been to a funeral. And as she was sort of just wanting time alone, walking along beside the river, and this eel was actually swimming along at the same speed as what she was walking. So it was like they were side by side. And she took a photo, and then she thought, no, I'm going to get a better photo. So she got the camera, she stopped and got her, actually it was a phone, and she took a photo. But the little eel had actually come and directed its head straight at her as if it was coming, you know, posing for a photo. But it was just a beautiful moment for her. But yeah, the stories in the research now that I've done about the eel, you know, I always say everyone starts off thinking that they're ugly. You know, they're slimy, they're all these horrible words that they use that so many people say that once you study them, they're quite beautiful. And they're very strong little fellas as well. So yeah, that's just a little story I'll share. But it was one of those shivering stories that how we do connect, and we do connect with different animals. You know, I connect with the birds, with the dogs, I'll connect with anything, because as you were saying, we're not better than them. We're the same, you know, and it's about sharing the space, and who gives us the right to actually demand something from another species. We don't have that right. We should be living in harmony. And I think that is what the importance of a message should be. So with Cassie's, with everyone else's stories, I think it's all about unity, coming together. You know, I'm fair-skinned as well. I get a lot of the abuse and remarks that you probably do, Cassie. But we have to keep walking. We have to be strong, because in the big scheme of things, we are equal with anyone else. And don't let anyone else tell you different. Yeah.
Well, it certainly shows how these stories are very much alive
Yeah.
and still happening. We have a couple of people from Brazil, and I'm interested to know Elana Goldstein, who's no stranger to Australia, who's spent a lot of time in Aboriginal art centres and has shared the experience in Australia with Indigenous communities in Brazil, and Maria Fernandes Perez de Barros, who's working with many communities. I'm interested to know if you could share with us how this conversation sounds to you in Brazil. Does it sound familiar? Can you feel it's something similar, or is it different?
I think the familiar part, and thank you for asking me to join the conversation. The familiar part is the invisible. They are also invisible here, and in this with this actual president that we have, they are suffering a lot with invasions and with the fire and everything else. So this is a difficult part to deal with. So it's difficult to gain their trust, especially as a white woman, to enter their world and to share part of their knowledge. So we are trying to, I am trying to tell their stories through art and through design. I'm working with them, both of them, the Mehinacos and the Pataxós right now, trying to bring their work to São Paulo, that is the biggest city that we have, to make them visible and to try to tell their stories to the new generations and to make them speak also. So I share the space I can get with them so they can have a voice. And last year in November, I brought Kulikirda from Xingu to an exhibition in São Paulo. And so he could tell a bit of how they live and how they work and about their handcrafts. It was a small public, but this is, for me, it was a great privilege to be able to do that. And now we are trying to make another project with women in the Mehinaco village to make them have autonomy with commercial things. Sorry, my English is not that good, but the women in Mehinaco villages, they are not allowed to go to the cities without the father or their husband or their children, because they say that as this relation with the white man world is new, is recent, they are not familiar with the way the white men deal with things. So they are a little bit ingenuous, and this problem is not only cultural, but they don't speak Portuguese or understand it well as men does. So they are kept in the villages most of the time. And this is difficult for them to work and to sell their handcrafts. They need the men to do that. And not all the men want to help them. They have other things to do, so it's a little bit complicated. And I'm trying to work with the women in a project to bring art to all the squares in São Paulo. This is a dream of mine, and now it's a dream of them too. So we are sharing this. I used to say that we are sharing a new story together. So I try to translate the way they live through art and bring this to spread their knowledge and to begin to show that we can live together side by side and actually with respect and with admiration, and we can work together without, how can I say, without make them invisible. So I work with them and I tell both stories, mine and them. So it's a way of showing all the world that we can build something together that is stronger and that is beautiful and that can let the new generations think about together with them and with the earth and all the animals, we can make a better future. So it's this kind of not a sacred story of them, but a new story we are building together.
Thank you, Maria. And we look forward to sharing those stories in future issues of Garland and understanding from your perspective the similarities and differences in this process. Is there anyone else would like to add? Paula, as somebody who's come between Australia and that part of the world, Uruguay, but you're familiar with, I think, some of the cultures that we're talking about. do you have anything to add from your perspective about the situation, these sharing of stories between radically different cultures?
Yeah, I mean,
Me,
absolutely.
No, sorry.
Thank you so much for organising this, and thank you to everyone who shared so far. It all very much resonates. So for me, I was born in Uruguay, and I have quite diverse lineages, as you would, being born on Charrua land. So in Uruguay, there's a lot of work being done to recognise the Indigenous nations that were there before colonisation, and that the descendants are obviously still here. And so for me, it's an interesting time and an interesting place to be in, because also having lived in Australia now for over 35 years, I feel very much connected to this place. And I love that we are all talking about this idea of honouring other ways of knowing and being. Living in Australia, I feel very privileged because the spirits of the land here are very much alive. They're deep in the ground. And for me, I very much connect to my ancestors in terms of my African roots, my Indigenous South American roots. And it's just a beautiful thing when you can work towards living in ceremony, where we can integrate and work together and think about moving beyond binaries. So it's just, I'm really excited that a lot of this work is happening and everyone feels like they're doing their bit. So there's so much work still to do, but it feels really, really good at this time to be, I guess, connecting with each other in this way and creating this space for these discussions, for these stories to be shared in a way that respects everybody, including the land, including the spirits, including the ancestors, you know, the trees, the birds, all that knowledge that is there. So yeah, from my perspective, I feel like we are perhaps making shifts in a good direction, and that it does start with an individual, but it's also the collective and that coming together. So yeah, really appreciate the opportunity and everything everyone's doing towards that.
Thanks, Paola. And like Cassie and Jules, you make beautiful objects that house those stories, which is, we can see, I've enjoyed seeing it being made this morning, that this is something that's very strong in Australia. We have galleries, obviously, where we can look at these objects and publications to share their stories. And Andrea's already started to talk to Yasipora about the objects that they make as well. We've shared that wonderful game, the Jaguar game, which is like a chessboard. And there are others like the stool that's part of the Ayvu Rapyta, one of the original stools. The stools are also still being made in those communities. So we have to be careful and think about what's appropriate to share, obviously. But I think seeing what you make may be something that opens other paths, as well as tourism, for that community to engage respectfully with the outside world rather than just being exploited by it. Ilana, did you have something that you wanted to add? It'd be
Yes.
good to hear from you.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. First of all, I'm watching Paula doing something, and it's so wonderful. I really appreciate what you're doing there. Well, it was very interesting to hear all that, and I would just like to share some thoughts that came to my mind while listening to you. Well, the first thing is a question. I was a little bit late, sorry, and I don't know if the text will be published in Portuguese as well or only in English. So just a practical question. And I'd like to say that from what I have been listening from indigenous peoples here and from what I have been reading on South American ethnology, in the beginning of times, there was no difference between man and animals. They were all this, they lived all together, and they all used to eat, to dance, to make war, to get married, to make ceremonies. And then some men became animals. They did something wrong, or they ate something that made them turn into animals. But in the beginning, there was no species or differentiation. That's why until today, in the Amerindian thinking, man and animals are not really separate. Some indigenous people here consider that the jaguar have their own society, and their skin, what they wear, is body painting. And the wild pig also have groups with rules and make parties and make wars. And they say humankind depends on the perspective. We think we are human beings, and when we look to a jaguar, we think that's an animal. But when the jaguar looks to us, it thinks I am a human being, and the other is just a prey that I will eat. So I don't know if you are familiar with this theory, but it's called Amerindian perspectivism, and it's quite dominant in Brazilian ethnology now. And well, the main idea is that man and animals are part of the same thing. And in general, all the myths talk about this beginning where every beings were linked. And as a consequence, today, when we hunt, when we see an animal, we are seeing a being with humanity inside it, uh, a being that has consciousness and feelings and intelligence. So just something for you that don't live in Brazil, or maybe those that aren't anthropologists.
And of course,
So this is,
the Mbia Guarani have populations across that part of South America, not just in northern Argentina or Paraguay, but in Brazil as well. They don't necessarily respect the nation state borders.
yeah, of course.
In
Yeah,
terms
of
of a
course.
Portuguese translation, I think Ayvu Rapyta has been published in Brazil, but maybe only in Spanish.
In
Yes,
Spanish, okay.
only in Spanish the first
Okay.
time. And
Well,
it's
then,
something that could be done. Absolutely.
yeah, it would be nice.
Just by me.
And then,
I
uh,
understand Portuguese, but I cannot write it well.
Mhm.
mhm, mhm.
Maybe you can help,
Well,
Alana.
maybe, yeah. Something that always impresses me is the importance of dreams, both in Australia and in Brazil. In Australia, of course, all the dreamings, the dream time linked to the creation stories and to the ancestors. But in Brazil as well, the shamans learn things through
Through
dreams.
dreaming, yes. They're extremely important.
Yeah.
Even, for
And
example, I've taken this habit, perhaps it's good for all of us. Early in the morning, you wake up, and the first thing you do is you try to remember your dream. And if you have a family or somebody you can discuss it with, this is the first conversation, not the news. It's what you
Yeah.
dreamt and what it
Uh-huh.
means for the following day. That's why sometimes Guaranis are considered lazy in Misiones because they might not go to work because of what they had dreamt the previous night, and they will not leave the village.
Exactly. There is a book, very interesting book, if you haven't read. It's called The Falling Sky. Do you know it?
No.
The Falling Sky. There's a, it was written by a Yanomami shaman, Yanomami people that
I
live
know.
between uh, Venezuela and Brazil. And there is a very famous shaman there called Davi Kopenawa. I will write afterwards in the chat. And he has asked a French anthropologist, Bruce Albert, to write with him because he wanted to share his knowledge with white Brazilians or non indigenous Brazilians. And so during 10 years, they were talking, and the French anthropologist, he wrote in Yanomami first, and then he translated to French, and now in many languages, English as well, and Portuguese, many languages. And what is very interesting is that this shaman in the book, he tells how he has become a shaman, and he had dreams. Since he was a child, he dreamt, and then he had signs telling him that he should develop that ability. And in the book, he always describes what shamans see in their dreams and how they can cure and treat you people with things that they learn in the dreams. So this is something that I find very interesting into contexts that are very different, but there are common elements. And the last thing I would like to say is that I am not sure, and I would like to ask Cassie. I am not sure if all indigenous people are really convinced that it's a good thing to share knowledge with non-indigenous people. I feel in Brazil a tension. Some people, like Davi Kopenawa, wanted to publish this book and wanted the book to be a bestseller because he finds important that we understand why the forest is so important for them and that they deserve respect with all their knowledge. So he wanted to be read. But other people in other different ethnic groups, they don't want non-indigenous to have access to their traditional knowledge because they are not sure this will be positive. I think they are afraid of intellectual property issues that really happened here before. Some people that register uh, a plant with medicinal properties or a recipe, or that use their traditional graphic designs to make fashion. I don't know. So this is one point. But the other point is that maybe we could do bad things with their knowledge, not in the proper way. So there is a sort of tension in some groups, like the Huni Queen in Acre and the Wayapi in Amapá, that where the old people they are not convinced it's very positive to share knowledge with white people, and young people generally they are more open to this kind of exchange.
Exactly. I agree. Yes, I
So
felt the same
I,
ambivalence
I
in
think
wow.
I think it would be good if we could use this moment now since you've raised this issue, Alana, to consider where we go with Ayvu Rapyta. Now, I understand most of you haven't had a chance to really look at it yet and to understand, or not that we can really understand, because it's a very abstract delivery of this text. It's a text which is, as I understand, recited by priests within the village, and it's part of the flux and the cycle of life within that village. So putting it into printed form is only an appearance of it, but still it's something. It does give us some window into that world and respect for that culture. Now, we have a selection, and there's a lot more that Andrea has translated. And the question is where we go from here. Now, obviously, the first thing we need to do, Andrea needs to go back to that community and tell them, you know, give an idea of what we spoke about and the stories that we shared, and gain their response, because it is, I guess, a matter of trust in terms of how this proceeds. There is, thankfully, some of you have donated some money which will go to the community fund. There is a community fund there to support ventures like the well and tourism and so on. And there's some people that we can trust to look after those funds. And I'm interested to know if you've got any other thoughts about where we can go. There is the rest of the text, as I mentioned, which we're not publishing initially, partly to see how things evolve. And obviously it could be something accessible to maybe some other Indigenous people, for instance, researchers, or eventually made public. We will see. But if anyone's got any thoughts about this whole business of circular knowledge, how in sharing knowledge, there is some way in which it contributes back to the ground on which that knowledge grew, the land on which that knowledge was found. If you've got any thoughts, be most interested.
Mm.
Well, the first thing is that I was not able, the system didn't accept when I tried to donate. So maybe it would be important to be in another platform and launch the project where it's easier to give some money. I think this platform doesn't accept credit cards from some countries, I suppose, because it didn't accept mine. I have tried many times. So this is just a practical aspect that could help to raise money. But your idea, Kevin, to make it available for more people, I think this is the main goal. If you translate something, you want more people to read it. So it would, I think if it was free to download, if it was possible to get enough donations to pay for the costs, and then make it available in Spanish and English for free, I think it would be very good.
Yes, that's certainly the idea. And I'm just wondering where it might be interesting to develop an exchange. Obviously, with something like Cassie's story, to share an image of that work with the story, possibly to invite a reciprocal story with an object. That could be one way in which there is a dialogue that develops.
This is what I tried to do when I was writing the story for you, Kevin, trying to tell a little bit about the Nehinaku's village and culture through the object. And this, I think it's small stories that I can share, that they allowed me to share, that these stories can open, I think they can open the mind of the people who read it, and make them look at the indigenous people in a different way, with respect and with admiration, and trying to understand the way they live, and the way they think. When I'm talking to the Araçari Pataxó, who is one of the leaders of the Pataxós here in Brazil, he told me that we, the white people, think they own the land, but the indigenous people know that they are sons of the earth. So it's completely different to think that you can buy a piece of land, and to think that you was his son. So this speaks really deep in me, knowing that every living being in earth is are like brothers. We are all the same. We are born from the earth, and we need to work together so we can make it the earth livable for the next generations.
Thank you, Maria. So in terms of this event, I think we can look at this event as a kind of a gift that we've offered to this village in northern Argentina, also to be shared potentially with other MBR. I first met the MBR when I met the son of Leon Cadogan, Rogelio, in Asunción, Paraguay, and they were doing wonderful work, particularly in terms of land rights, to protect the MBR against the appropriation of their lands, particularly by farmers and agriculture. And they will be also encouraged. And Paraguay has just recognized Ayvu Rapyta as part of its national cultural heritage. But I think in general, these sorts of stories are important because they talk about a culture that we can make with our own hands, that culture is a living thing. It's not just something we consume through Netflix or all the other processed ways in which culture appears to us, which are often disconnected from reality. And this is a kind of a way of culture making that's a lot more grounded, that I think we can all share benefits of. But I would say, as an Australian and an Australian descendant of Australian settlers, for me, this is also important because to a degree I share some of the values of the Australians who tried to start a utopian socialist community in Paraguay. And, you know, I've been to the place and I've met the descendants of those Australians, and I think of them as having something special. But it was a failure because it was a white man's socialism. It was about certain values and a disregard for Indigenous people, which meant that their crops failed because they didn't speak to the local Guarani, the local MBR, about how to look after the land, which is the same story as what's happened in Australia. When you see the devastation that industrial agriculture has on the land. And, you know, Cassie, you share this every day where you are at the moment. So for me now, this precious story, which was overlooked by those Australian settlers at the beginning of the 20th century, is now finally coming to light. And so I really want to thank you, Andrea, for this. And hopefully it's a beginning in terms of this sort of dialogue, so that we can begin to share stories. And I thank you all for your patience. It's been a bit awkward at times as we try and sort of connect across so many cultural differences, but you've been very generous. And I perhaps would like to invite finally Andrea to help us understand how we might share a MBR greeting, the Agurjeti. Would you be able to do that?
Yes. Yes, I'm also very grateful. And I think all of us here coincide in so many of our views that it's a pleasure to be with people like you. Thank you. There is a way of saying hello and a way of saying goodbye for moi people, which is you hold up your hands more or less around the length of here, around your ears, and you say agujevete. Agujevete means may I recognize you're full of grace and I welcome your grace. Aguje means grace, which is something that also I wanted to share. I'm learning the language with so much difficulty and humility, and I love the language. I'm loving it. So agujevete is I welcome your grace, and I recognize your grace. It's like a
Agujevit.
welcome. Agujevete to all of you. A pleasure. Thank you for sharing this. Very late.
Congratulations for your work.
No, thank you. It's not, I really feel it's not about me at all. I don't even want to appear. It's like I feel like a conduit so that they receive the respect they deserve. That's what I feel. They deserve it. It's a wonderful culture, really. Like all the others that we have been hearing about. Perhaps the wind is changing. Perhaps for
I
them.
hope so.
I'm just wondering, Sean, you've been listening as well. Lots of issues have come up. Sean is a legal scholar who has been looking at issues of the South quite a lot. Have you had any thoughts, responses to what you've heard?
No, except thank you to everyone for sharing. It's been as ever enlivening to listen and to hear. So I work in a law school as an academic, and I have lived in Australia for 25 years. And I think when I came to Australia, my thoughts were as many to be a justice warrior in the name of public interest. And it's taken me a long time to learn that my job as a teacher and a scholar is actually to learn the law and to think of it as being obligated to the land and to people. And the way that I have learned that is in a way very similar to Kevin, which is having to sit down and shut up and listen and pay attention to the world. So Kevin, no, but thank you for bringing me in at the last second to place me. But I have nothing to say explicitly right at the end of the conversation.
Yes, and Sean's been working with scholar Christine Black, who's been providing a particularly interesting Indigenous perspective on the law and country as being, in terms of Indigenous thinking as part of the law, and how that translates into legal discussions. So again, that may be some interesting source of dialogue across the Pacific to South America. Well, I'm sure you've all got big days ahead of you. Who knows what sort of stories or dreams, if you're in South America, what sort of stories may emerge today. But thank you so much for sharing it.
Thanks to you, Kevin.
And enjoy reading these stories that will emerge in future issues as our garden grows.
Thank you
Thank
for the
you.
invitation.
Thank you.
Mhm.